All right, we're live on Facebook.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Smart with Your Money Live. I am Chase Peckham. I am the Director of Community Outreach and Education at the San Diego Financial Literacy Center, the education arm of DebtWave Credit Counseling. And today, this is a good one. This is something that has been on the, it's been in headlines. It's been at the topic of conversation around the finance world for sure, but literally everybody is talking about it. And we're going to talk about what is inflation. And Felipe, man, we went really deep on this on our podcast, Talk Wealth to Me, and there's just so many parts to this.
There is, and it's unavoidable. You open up your web browser and whatever homepage you have probably has some mention of inflation. Every month, everyone's waiting on the inflation numbers. What do they mean? You can't turn into a news. And honestly, aside from all that, even if you're able to zone out, not go online and you're just kind of living your everyday life, we're all seeing it. Anyone who pumps gas or goes to the grocery store or buys anything is going to see inflation. It's made it, unfortunately, very easy to teach inflation to my 8-year-old. It's like, buddy, look, it costs more than it did last year. Right. It's happening in real life, in real time. And
not like anything we have seen before. Your generation really hasn't seen anything like this. My generation did, but I was a young kid. Right. Most of us just kind of remember sitting in long gas lines with our parents, but nothing like what, in my adult life, not seeing anything like this.
Yeah. So, do we have a solution for it here at the end? No, I don't have a solution for it. I'm not an economist, not that smart, but I will do my best to try and help explain it. And maybe a solution for your personal finances, and some things you can do yourself to try and weather this inflation storm, however long it may be. So first, what is inflation? Am I screen sharing? Looking good?
Looking great.
All right.
So we love Schitt's Creek on this show.
I do. They have lots of great gifts. And
they have
it makes
great,
sense.
Yes.
Even in the notice when Hulu put out the notice that they had purchased the rights to it, they mentioned how often the gifts are used as part of the reason for the purchase. But it basically is a decline in purchasing power. It's the rate at which the costs of goods and services increase over time. It's a normal thing. There's always some kind of inflation. It's when it gets to a higher rate of speed that it becomes problematic. Yeah. If we were talking about 2% inflation, no one would be talking about it.
Actually, I think it's about 3 is normal, right? That's right. About typical.
Yeah, 2-3% is a normal rate of inflation. We wouldn't be talking about it. But because it's not, because it's higher, because it's 8, 9, or whatever it's going to be next month, it is a topic of conversation because it puts a strain on people's finances, and it's just not a healthy spot for our economy and any economy really to be in. It is also important to note that we're not the only country dealing with inflation right now. It is a world issue. This is a world economy that we live in, and some are struggling more than us, some are struggling less than us, but it is a global issue. It's just part of economics. So, it's basically at what rate things are costing more. Now, what is used to calculate inflation? Well, they use the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. You hear about the CPI and you're like, what is CPI? I don't know what that means. Well, it takes the weighted average of prices of a certain basket of goods. These are things that we need for every day, not all of them, but majority of us need all these things for everyday living. These are like everyday living expenses that Americans use: transportation, food, medical care,
products and services.
And they take the price of them and this is the retail price, the price that we as consumers pay, the final price. And it's calculating, taking those prices, the price changes, and then averaging them out based on how much they take part in the basket. I know this is so confusing. I apologize. This is, if I was an economics professor, I could sit here and probably talk about this for a whole lecture.
Honestly,
I'm not.
but most of us who don't love economics would not care to sit through that anyway. So
No one wants to. I don't want to.
that's why we're here. We make it
and
simple.
I can't teach it. I'm just doing my best to make it as simple as possible. You know, but so it's how, at what rate that basket of goods has changed. Doesn't mean every
This
single
is a very
thing.
good graph for that. This really shows that.
And it doesn't mean that everything went up at the same percentage. As you could see by this, some things actually went down. But it's just kind of the weighted average. Some things went up by a lot. And you know, that kind of brings the whole average.
The things
together.
that we've been talking about the most, right? Fuel, oil,
There's a reason
energy,
we're talking about it. Exactly.
all of those things.
Yeah. Electricity here in San Diego.
Everywhere.
You know, it's really, you know, and that's what it means. But then you get a percentage, and then you're saying like, all right, at some point he's going to stop doing math, right? Unfortunately, this one has a little bit more math than normal. What does a percent mean? Because that's what we hear. We hear inflation is 8.6%, inflation is 9%, 7%, 2%, 3%, whatever it is, and you get a percentage point. And sometimes, and it comes out monthly, so you might be hearing, and it's for the previous completed month, so it's always like a month behind. And they'll say inflation was at 8%. And you're sitting there like, what does that mean? You know, if inflation was at this percentage point, does that mean I paid 8% more than I did last month? It doesn't go by month. It's much like APR, and when it comes to debt and credit, where it's an annual rate. So if the inflation was 8%, that assumes that if inflation stayed constant at that level for a year, you can expect to pay 8% more. So as I tend to do, I stick with easy math. So for example, if there was a constant rate of inflation of 5%, and us here in San Diego pay $5 a gallon for gas, right? If that stays at 5% for a whole year, a year later, you would have been paying 5% more than what you're paying now. So that $5 gallon of gas with 5% inflation for a year is going to cost you $5.25. You see what I did with the math? Keep it simple.
Yeah, but you're not showing it.
I'm not showing it. I know, because then it just gets more confusing. That's why I use fives.
Okay.
You know, 5%, 5 cents for each gallon, for each dollar. There's 5 of them. That's an extra quarter. I tried to show it, and it was just
I got you.
confusing. But you know, that's what it means. It's for the whole year. You don't pay 8%, 5% more than you did last month. It's just that's the rate at which is increasing. So with inflation, like a lot of other things, economics, there's supply and demand.
Are you changing the screens because they're not working?
Yeah, supply and demand changes. There you go. So supply and demand, the real sweet spot is right, ideally, where supply and demand are equal, and that will you know, allow for the best price, the best, you know, it just, everything's running more smoothly. But a lot to do with inflation could also be the issue with supply and demand. We saw this a lot with the housing market. Demand was significantly higher than supply. So what that did is that inflated, that increased prices, and it made it harder for people to purchase homes.
Right.
Interest rates went up, which is the Federal Reserve's way of trying to pull back inflation, making it a little less, or making it a lot less affordable to use debt. And that could be a whole nother presentation in itself. But that's their way, the Federal Reserve's way of trying to rein in inflation. They've increased APR, and the housing market is cooling down. Less people are out trying to purchase a home. Prices are starting to drop. And it's all a big supply and demand seesaw that we're all on. Lots of seesaws going at the same time, where people are trying to find just the right balance. Not increase it too far, not decrease it too far, and try and find the nice middle ground.
Right.
And
I mean, that's why we're running into other things. I mean, there's the supply, that what we've been hearing, supply chain a lot, getting goods and services that we get from China a lot of times, or
cars.
the exports and imports.
Yeah.
We're struggling, and a lot of that to do with COVID, and things weren't being produced. So there's many reasons for it, but right now demand for a lot of things is outweighing supply.
Right. And as inflation increases, some people start pulling in their spending a little,
Right.
decreasing demand, bringing everything back down. It's
Correct.
a constant battle.
Yep.
And it's always going on. It's just sometimes it gets a little bit more unbalanced than others. And right now we're in a period where it's quite unbalanced on a lot of different things. So that's what we're trying to get to, that market equilibrium where we can just kind of decrease the inflation rate, because none of us want to pay more. So how does it affect me? When inflation is at your normal rate, at a low percentage point, it's not going to be a huge dent. You don't even notice it year in and year out.
Your cost of goods and services are staying in line with what your income is typically.
Right.
If everything's equal.
You get a raise, an increase in your pay, and then it's the same or more than the inflation rate, then you have more buying power or equal buying power. Now, let's say you get a 4% raise, but inflation was at 8%. Well, you do that math, and it means you have, although you got 4% more money, you have 4% less buying power, because you take that 8% of inflation and then you subtract that 4% raise that you got, you still are in a negative 4%. So yes, you got a raise, but it may have been a cost of living raise, but that doesn't keep up with inflation. You have less power to buy stuff.
Your money doesn't go nearly as far as really is
right.
what it means.
Right. And so that's something to keep in mind. That's kind of how it works and how it affects us. And honestly, we see it every day when you go pump gas, when you go to the grocery store, when you go to different things. And this is part of the reason we get the stories of back in my day. I told my kids, back in my day when I started driving here in San Diego, you can get less than $2 a gallon of gas, which I know for some people they have better back in my day stories, right, Chase?
Yeah, I got gas for 79 cents a gallon when I was first starting to drive at 16 years old. So I go back a little bit further. And also back in those days, there was not the fuel California laws that, so there was different factors for that. But yeah, I'm getting to the age now where it's like back in my day, I paid 25 cents for a candy bar.
Right.
But, I also made the minimum wage was $2.75 an hour at the time. So, right. I mean, you can't just say that, everything's
There's more to it.
Right.
There's more to it than just the inflation price, but sometimes it's kind of fun to blow the little kids' minds. Where, oh, I remember back when I was little, you get a burrito supreme at Taco Bell for 99 cents. Or a Whopper at Burger King or whatever. Good luck with that today. But so many other things have increased. So this is why you get those.
Probably good for our health that it's not that cheap.
Oh, definitely good for my health. Then you go less often.
Yes.
But the further you go back as you get older, the more exciting those back in my day stories get. Oh, yeah. If you talk to someone who's older and older and older, you're like, oh, back in my day, remember when iTunes came out? A song used to cost you, and who even buys music now? So things change along with it. But back when Netflix started, you might hear from a young person, it would only cost me. So that's where it comes from, and there's more to it. Does it hurt your savings? Yes, it can. And you want to have that emergency savings that's fluid, that's liquid, that you can run in, grab it, and use for your emergency expenditures. But in the long term, if you have that savings and that amount does not change, because honestly, the amount that you're getting in a traditional savings account is zero, or very well near it. The buying power of that money does decrease with time. 10 years, if you have, easy math here, $10,000 put away for an emergency, 10 years from now, that $10,000 won't cover the same buying power. It loses buying power due to inflation. And this is why it's important, talk to a financial planner. Don't take my investment advice for it, but to get your long-term savings, long-term investments, somewhere where you're going to get some kind of rate of return that hopefully outpaces inflation. And hopefully in the long run, your money can grow faster than inflation so that your buying power grows and doesn't decrease. That's not to say you don't want to have money in a savings account for an emergency. You do. Just be aware that in the long run, that decreases its buying power.
It's about value. It's
right.
Eventually, I mean, that's why they say when you're saving and you're trying to think about how much you need to put away for when you retire based on your age, you have to account for inflation. So how much, and people will say that all the time, if you were to have your dollar stretch exactly like it would today, how much do you need to have to be able to, for the same expenses and everything else that you have down the line? And that's why, certified financial planners and those kinds of things are really a big help when it comes to talking about that stuff.
Absolutely.
And preparing.
So it can hurt your savings, and it will in the long run. Now, what does that do to debt? Well, if we're paying more for everything from over time, it makes it harder to have that extra income to tackle some of that debt. And in some cases, if you don't adjust your budget, it sometimes will increase your debt. If you were living right on even between your expenditures and your income, that 8% inflation rate, you don't adjust your budget a year later, you're no longer even. You are now negative 8%. Assuming you don't change your income or your other expenses. So if you were right at even, inflation could put you into the negative, bring you further into debt. And it just makes it for less money available.
You mentioned it at the beginning, the Fed is raising interest rates. So the cost of debt is going up.
That too.
And with credit cards and those kinds of things these days, we have variable interest rates.
Right.
So as rates go up, so are your interest rates on your credit cards.
Right.
So because the days of those fixed rates outside of a home loan or a car loan, you don't see those anymore, because the cost of doing business, even for the world of debt business, the banking, their costs go up. So they don't just eat that. It's got to go somewhere, and it comes to us, the consumer.
Right. And there's
always coming back to the consumer.
Always going to be variable. Doesn't matter what your credit score is at this point.
Right.
Sometimes
just might start lower than the others.
Right. But at the same time, rates go up, and rates will go down eventually, and then your rates will go down as well. But in the meantime, while you have that debt, that increase in rate can really put a hamper on. Aside from, unless you're on some kind of a program like a debt management plan where you have that fixed APR and fixed monthly payment agreement with the creditors, in that case, your rate doesn't go up. You could still pay it off in the same amount of time.
Yes.
But if you're paying it off on your own and interest rates are fluctuating, they've gone up. So it'll allow for less money to be thrown at debt. All right, so it's not just inflation. We've mentioned it a couple times. High inflation is bad, but that's not the only reason prices go up. There are other factors that come into play. And here, I found this cool article on The Hustle, which I have no clue who they are, but their math was accurate. So that's all I care about. And for the purpose of this example, so this is an example of what it would cost a family of 4 in 1960 to go to the movies: 4 tickets, 2 sodas, 2 popcorns, and a box of candy. They went back to 1960, and these were the prices here. 70 cents for a ticket, 18 cents for a soda, 20 cents for a popcorn, and then 20 cents for that box of candy, for a grand total of $3.76. Then what they did is they calculated and looked at the actual inflation from 1960 to 2022, which I believe was about 888%, is what the inflation rate was. Then they took those prices and adjusted them for inflation, meaning they increased them by 888%, or whatever that number is. And this is what just inflation would have done. The movie ticket should be $6.17. That soda should be $1.78, and the popcorn, $1.97, assuming that the price of these goods kept up with inflation.
Right.
Just straight inflation, what the actual rate was. And it should cost that family of four $34.15. Unfortunately, that's not the only factor that comes into play. And going to the movies in 2022 for a family of four would actually cost you more around $68.73,
Right.
which you'll notice is a lot more than just adding the inflation. There's so many other factors: the cost of doing business, the change in the movie industry,
Change the business model.
Streaming, where I might just watch a movie at home instead of going to the movies, and that's one less person paying for a ticket, one less person. So different business altogether.
It's the model.
World.
So
Right.
their model now is to make money on goods. And
Right.
so they inflate the prices. And you see that anywhere from like going to a ball game or
Yeah.
going to a football game or going to a concert or going anywhere. Anytime you're going to go to those concessions, or I was just at my daughter's volleyball at the convention center in the national championships in Indianapolis. And for a soda there was $7. I mean,
Right.
just to watch, girls volleyball. So
Right.
it's kind of inflated in all of those kinds of venues, because that's how those venues are supplementing revenues and
Yeah.
keeping the costs of getting the actual convention, the actual tournament. They can keep those prices competitive, so they get the business, and then they make the money on the other end, which is exactly how movie theaters and all those other companies and are doing that.
Yeah. So they had other great examples, like how much parking has gone up in Disney. The other two examples were a Disneyland trip and then a ball game. It was actually kind of cool. So inflation's not alone. I don't want to spend too much time on this. I know we're going a little long here, but there are other types of inflation, or ways to make it look like inflation's not going on.
Other shuns.
Triggered by, yeah, exactly. So shadow inflation. For example, you go to a restaurant and maybe they don't bring you the free breadsticks or the free bread and the butter like they used to. Maybe they don't come and refill your soda as much as they used to, or they don't offer free refills. So that you're still paying the same, but you don't get the same services or the same freebies that you would have gotten previous to the.
You would like ranch with that? That'll be 25 cents,
right?
Or 50 cents, or $1 or whatever.
Here's your ranch, and it's a little tiny little thing that you're never going to have enough of. And I know us, United States and California, we love our ranch. Apparently it's not that big in other parts of the world, but you need it for fries. You need it for all kinds of things. You want ketchup? Yeah, here's your tiny little ketchup. And then shrinkflation, which is similar, but it's basically you get the same price for that bag of chips, but that bag of chips is actually smaller. It actually contains less chips. That drink, that bottle seems the same size for your sports drink, but it's actually an ounce or two smaller. You'll see it all the time. Tissue paper goes from having 64 tissues in a box to having 60 tissues in the box.
I used to laugh at my father because my 80-year-old dad is like, I can't believe that I used to get 220 sheets of paper towels, and now I get 180 for the same price. I'm not buying them anymore. And then you can get into whether paper towels and those products are good for the environment. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about something.
But you get less, and it makes it seem like, yay, prices haven't gone up, and they haven't. But you're getting less.
Right.
Less
you're getting
units,
less for your buck.
Less volume, less whatever it is. So that keeps their costs down without having to increase your costs on the surface.
Yep.
But then it just means you have to buy more of them. So how do you deal with it? Get creative. Shark Week is next week, so I thought this was funny. But it doesn't. Get creative with how you do things. What is the enjoyment that you're going to get out of a purchase before you go make the purchase? If you're not going to get anything out of it, then don't do it. There's a lot of different things. I'll go over some of them here, but sometimes it takes a little creativity to kind of redo the things that you're used to.
Yeah.
And really, it wouldn't be a presentation by the SDFLC if we didn't say it's budget time. Revisit your budget. And it's, I hate putting it in there because I feel like I say it all the time. But honestly, go through your budget. And this is what I meant in the last one, get creative. What subscriptions can you cancel or pause? What can you change where, I'm trying to be better about making sure I don't let things expire. Like buy something, eat the darn thing before it goes bad.
Yes.
That is like my biggest pet peeve that we're struggling with, is like, just make sure that you eat everything. And that decreases spending.
Yes.
Have it be, maybe instead of going out to dinner, you go out for dessert and you eat in.
Right. And I try to tell my kids all the time, it's not about what you feel like eating right now. It's
Right.
what we have. And that's what we need to eat, because we need nourishment. We don't need to fill our taste buds all the time, even though we would like to.
Sometimes
It's
you
a
just gotta
constant
eat the
battle
turkey
in this house.
tacos because you gotta eat the turkey tacos. And that's the next thing that's up on the list.
Right.
But I don't feel like a salad today, but we gotta eat the salad today or it's gonna go bad. So we're eating a salad today.
Right.
But getting creative, maybe with your driving, being a little better with your driving so you spend less gas, so you spend less at the pump, and being better about your groceries, making a list, using ingredients in multiple recipes. There's a lot of things that you could do, but really it comes down to doing your budget and seeing where can I get creative and cut back so that I could weather this inflation storm. Because if you can cut back on certain things, a certain percentage, that will help reduce, like, where's your inflation? Where's your consumer price index, the things that you buy, and where can you cut back on? And that's really where it's key, is doing that budget and itemizing and seeing, I could just not eat out once more. That reduces my, my expenses by, 2%. So I do it a couple times. There we go. I've made up for inflation by reducing my expenses 4%, 5%, whatever it is. And really that's where the budget comes into play. Lastly, any questions? And we do have, where we have gone in far more detail on inflation specifically. Recently on a podcast, it's called Inflation Today, How Did We Get Here? Professor Charkins,
he was amazing.
Absolutely explained it better than we could ever. And it was a whole hour, so you get much more detail on inflation, how it works,
and how we got here.
Yeah, exactly, how we got here. And then you have a little older one with the same professor on economics in general, because I did kind of bombard you all with economics topics. So if you wanted to go back and relearn some econ in a not boring way, much better explained than I ever could, there's that one as well. And then we do have a question, Chase. Will all credit cards have higher interest rates because of inflation? How do I know my new interest rate?
Well, first, if you have your, if you do your banking or you do your credit online, or you can look at your invoice that you get every month, and it will say right there on the front what your APR and what your interest rates are that you paid the month prior, or what it would be. So it's very easy to see that on whether it's going up or not. You can see it month. I mean, if you can log in and you have access to your account, you can look it up daily and see how that is changing.
Yeah, absolutely. And not every APR is going to go up. Some people are already at the maximum.
Right.
In that case, your APR is not going to go up any higher.
But if you're at the maximum, do not put anything on that balance.
Don't go adding more debt. But it's just something, it's just being conscious of your different, different APRs on different cards for different balances, and going online, like Chase said, and just kind of check them out as you go. You also see a card agreement that kind of explains what your APR can range from. So you can look at it that way. Okay. All right, and that's all the questions we have. You can always continue learning with those episodes and more on our podcast, Talk Wealth to Me. Get it wherever you get your other podcasts, or on our website or on the DebtWave website, wherever you decide to listen to it. New episode every Friday. And then join us in 2 weeks. We're back, saving for your child's future. It's August 2nd. And we'll be talking about saving for kids and all the different things that go along with that. So
Parenting, it's so easy, right?
right, it's fun, they said.
Yeah.
And it is, but it has its challenges as well.
It has its challenges.
So thank you everybody for joining us, and we hope to see you back at a future Smart with Your Money Live.
Yep. Thanks for joining us, everybody.